Hi everyone, welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. I have with me today Vedanarayan Vedantam, who heads the SME business at Razorpay. Veda has nearly 2 decades of experience at companies such as Healthify.me, Stazilla, and Simply Learn, and is a fantastic operator who has had stints in sales, marketing, consulting, and other functions as well. So, without further ado, welcome Veda to the Startup Operator podcast.
Hey, thanks, Roshan. Thanks for the opportunity and thanks for that flattering introduction.
No, I thought I was being. I thought I had to keep it short, so I didn't go into all of the other stuff that you've done. So thanks so much for making the time. I mean, as I was looking at your experience itself, I mean, it's roughly around two decades now. What are some of the challenges that you have sought, and what you've learned from them?
Yeah, thanks for making me feel older. And no,
Why,
it's
sir?
been a wonderful. I mean, it is what it is. In this, I mean, given the times that we live in, I think there are a lot of things to be grateful for, and
Yeah.
something that I do, engage on a regular basis. I do look back on the journey. You're right. It's been close to 2 decades now, and it's been one hell of a roller coaster. Had multiple kinds of adventures. I started off in technology, then had a very brief but unhappy stint in FMCG post my B school. Then I moved into consulting. I was in financial services consulting, lived abroad. Then I came back, I did product management, for another fintech payments company for a long time. Then got bitten by the startup bug, and over the last 8-9 years or so, started off in product. Then I moved into marketing by chance, and the serendipity played a big role there. There was somebody who was handling digital marketing quit, and I thought there were a lot of synergies between product management and digital marketing. So I wanted to pick up both mandates, and I got that opportunity. And then after that, I got opportunities to manage the entire marketing canvas in one of the subsequent organizations, which included brand and everything. And so had wonderful opportunities to lead marketing efforts across fashion tech, travel tech, ed tech, health tech, and now at Razorpay, where I manage the entire SME mandate. And plus, of course, I've managed to, in the last 2-3 years, something that I've also done, also corresponding, no coincidence, it also corresponds to the point where midlife crisis has possibly taken its toll. So I've started branching out of my regular day job, and I've been looking for opportunities for keeping life interesting beyond that. So I've gotten into
Right.
teaching a lot.
Right.
And I am a visiting faculty member at quite a few IIMs across the country: Bangalore, Indore, and Kashipur. Then been a freelance consultant for a while. I was, and I still am a marketing mentor working with various startup acceleration programs across the country, multiple TIE chapters, and so on. So it's been one hell of
Right.
a roller coaster journey. Interestingly enough, I sometimes wish, Roshan, if I had been in startups when I was much younger.
Yeah.
So the first half of my career, when I was young, I had spent it in a lot of large, potentially bureaucratic, red tape-ish organizations. In the second half of my company, I've spent it in a lot of all hands on deck kind of high chaos startups.
Right.
And it's been, and you have different kinds of learnings in different kinds of environments. While being in a large organization gives you an opportunity to understand the need for process rigor, to understand the need for working with multiple large number of cross-functional stakeholders, a lot of whom are based in different geographies, different time zones, etc. Well, working in a startup again gives you different kinds of learnings. You get the opportunity to manage large jurisdiction, absorb pressure, work well under pressure, be good with numbers, extremely good with numbers, be very nimble, etc. And at Razorpay, it's been a bit of both. So Razorpay is not quite an early stage high chaos startup, nor is it an MNC, so to speak, which is very, very well established. So it's you kind of get a best of both worlds.
Right.
So in that sense, it's been very interesting. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. So the other interesting aspect, that I noticed is that you've operated across sectors, right? So you've been in
Yeah.
edtech with Simply health, fintech, and you've also operated across functions as well: sales, marketing, consulting, product, as you mentioned. You've done different types of businesses, B2B, B2C. Are you sort of checking all the boxes possible for someone to do? I mean, and must have been an interesting experience operating at so many different diverse sort of industries and functions.
Oh yeah, it's been very interesting for sure. And I think the experiences in travel tech, for example, are very different from, just to take an example, just experiences in travel tech that I had in terms of leading marketing at Stagella. They were very different from the kind of experiences that I had at EdTech. Travel tech is that kind of a space which is like ultra hyper competitive. It was obviously not in the post-COVID new normal, but at least in the pre-COVID era, it was like ultra hyper competitive. And if you rewind back 6-7 years ago, when the Make My Trip and iBibo merger, etc., did not happen, there were like so many strong players. Cleartrip was a very strong player back then. You had a lot of grown biggies with deep pockets. Plus, you also had a lot of multinationals, right, who wanted to make India front, middle, and center of their strategy. And Stagella was right in the thick of things. And this was at a time when even before Oyo really took off. And at one point, Stagella was even bigger than Oyo, and it was like ultra hyper competitive, and it was a dog eat dog kind of a world. But essentially, you were trying to sell a commoditized product at the end of the day, and you were trying to bring differentiation there. While Stagella did have a lot of unique selling points in terms of making sure that it had a lot of inventory which was exclusive, right, value and budget accommodations, etc., which were below a certain price point, which were unavailable in a lot of the other marketplaces, which was a big USP of the brand. It was always extremely competitive. At Simplilearn, the challenge was different. The challenge was in the edtech space. It was not so much from competition per se, but more so in terms of consumer inertia. How do you get consumers to actually gravitate towards spending 12,000-15,000 rupees in buying a certification program? And after they do so, how do you convince them to come back and buy another program? Because repeats was a big problem statement. If I've just convinced you, Roshan, to spend 50,000 bucks in say picking up a digital marketing program, it's going to be a pretty difficult conversation for me to convince you to spend another 15,000-20,000 picking another course. Yeah. So that was a different kind of a problem statement. In health tech, again, it's kind of a similar problem statement of inertia, consumer inertia, which we had to solve for. Both of these have been solved for to a large degree by COVID. But leaving aside that, it was always a difficult problem statement because you were also going up against offline. Offline was your biggest competition in the case of Hilton. And you also had this huge T-Rex in the room, which was hyper-funded, which was Cult, in the case of Elthifami, which was also a different kind of a problem statement. At Razorpay, the problem statement is, again, fairly unique, which makes it interesting because it's the SME problem statement. And SME as a consumer persona, as a segment, I do believe that no other brand has actually solved it really well. If you leave aside possibly the case of Tally, which has been doing it for the last 3 decades now, which is like pretty significant investment of time, and they have 1 million customers in the country. There's nobody who solved it at scale, right? To a certain extent, you could argue GoDaddy and a few other players, but nobody who really has solved it at scale. And SME is also a bit of a strange animal because it's not quite straight-jacketed, formal B2B per se, enterprise, high-end enterprise, nor is it B2C per se. It's somewhere in between. But I do believe that it is closer to the B2C end of the spectrum than it is to high-end enterprise sales. Which is a space probably where you guys operate in, where Vimo operates in. So it is closer to the B2C. And I do believe that a lot of the marketing and sales playbooks which are necessary for success in the SME space are very similar to some of the playbooks that are essential for success in the B2C space, with some differences, of course, but closer to B2C than it is to enterprise. So a lot of different learnings. That's a little bit of a long-winded response to your question. I hope that's okay. But
no, that's pretty interesting actually. So I think SME customers, you are still dealing with individual stakeholders, right? You're talking to the founders or maybe one below that. So the decision making is a lot more nimble. But then at the same time, they will really extract a lot of value. There's that switch. There's no inertia to switch as such as well, which is something that people notice, especially during tough times, right? I'd love to get back to that, but before that, I want to talk to you about something that you just mentioned, which is a data-driven approach, right? So whether it is product or whether it's marketing, you seem to have this very data-driven approach to things, right? So how did you cultivate that, and how has that helped you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, Roshan, is to be a strong first principles driven thinker and not be held down by baggage. So if you have a very strong first principles driven approach, then data automatically is an outcome of that thinking approach. You don't need to necessarily look for data per se, because as an outcome of your entire thinking approach, data driven, you would actually, because for you to validate a lot of the first principles drinking assumptions, thinking led assumptions, you would need data to validate a lot of those assumptions. I think that's where it all stems from. And so you need to have a strong handle on data in this day and age. There's no ways about it. As a leader in this day and age, for you to command the respect of your peers, of your own team, you need to have a good command of data. I do believe that all of us are sales guys in some shape or form, because we need to be able to sell our ideas. right? If you're working in an organization, you need to work with people, you need to work with cross-functional stakeholders. You may not always have the comfort of being able to pull rank, and you need to have the ability to be able to get people to align and rally around to your idea behind your vision. You need to be able to collaborate well with people. And for doing a lot of this, it's important for you to have objective conversations and objective debates, which only comes if you have data. Otherwise, it ends up becoming my opinion versus Roshan's opinion. It's a question of who shouts the loudest, right? Which is certainly not a good way of having a conversation. So for you to have objective debates and objective conversations and healthy conversations, you need to, you need data. So it helps I hope that helps.
Right. So one of the famous shouting matches is often between sales and marketing, right? So, and now you have this unique position of heading both sales and marketing. So what is that like? So let's assume that, your marketing guys come to you and say X, or you can fill in the blanks, right? Obviously, you know what they're going to say. And the sales guys say something else, say Y or whatever. So how do you get them onto the same page?
I think it's always a tricky one. I think the only thing is that one of the things that I do ensure is I make sure that both marketing and sales are both. So for example, I specifically ensure that marketing's OKRs, for example, objectives are not based on leads. For example, everybody's goals are revenue. Everybody's goals are based on the number of customers that you can acquire. So as long as you have business goals, which are common for both teams, then that brings an alignment in the first place. I think that is one of the biggest things. And here again, objectivity plays a big part. For example, quite often marketing guys come back and say that my leads are of great quality. Why is the sales guy not converting? Or why is the sales guy not giving a call for every single lead that I generate? So we've managed to solve this example in the Razorpay case here, in an objective fashion by having a lead scoring algorithm. So every single lead that comes in is scored on a basis of, with some weightages, basis a bunch of different variables. Right, the guy is from this particular industry, has given me a business email, yes or no, has given me some sense of revenue potential, etc. So on that basis, we have a lead score which is calculated, which is jointly prepared by the marketing and sales guys. So nobody can come back and say that the algorithm is wrong. So both of them have signed off on it, and on that basis, we sign off saying that now the sales team, as per the organization's hiring capability today, the sales team can have only X people staffed. Basis, and this is their capacity, which means they can handle their capacity multiplied by 20, multiplied by the number of people, 20 working days in a month, 22 working days in a month, multiplied by number of leads that they can handle in any given day.
Right.
So, and then we say that, so they're going to pick up, so given the lead inflow that we see, they can pick up the top 20 percentile of leads alone. So all the sales guy is going to do is going to sort the leads that you generate in descending order of lead score and pick up the top 20 percentile. And that essentially is it, right? So if you can have this kind of that's an example of objective debate in action.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, all leads are not created action equal, right? I mean, we see this as well. And over a point of time, I mean, it just becomes a meaningless number if it's not some proxy of revenue, as you also mentioned, right? So the other aspect, I mean, with what you mentioned is your current role at Razorpay, you work with a lot with SMEs as such. What is that experience like? I mean, you briefly touched upon it earlier, but if you could talk about some of the characteristics of these SME customers as such.
Yeah, it's a very interesting problem statement, Roshan, as I mentioned. And for example, we've seen a lot of differences in SME behavior over the last year. So what we are noticing is that we are seeing more and more non-tech entrepreneurs who are actually looking to start up and who actually want to start receiving digital payments. They are also having technology startups. And a lot of these entrepreneurs and SMEs who are coming on board do not have the luxury of having a development agency in place. And they don't understand technology. They don't understand coding. So some of the products they do really well, and that's changed in the last 12 months. For example, Payment Gateway was our number one selling product for a long time, as far as the receivable side of the business was concerned, where we allow businesses to be able to receive funds. That's changed in the last 12 months, where Payment Gateway is no longer the number one product, because that has the extra step of integration, for which either you need to have the technical know-how or you need to have a developer. Now we have products like payment links, payment pages, payment buttons, which literally you can start using with no integration hassle in under 5 minutes. We've timed it. It's 4 minutes, 28 seconds. And even if you don't know anything about coding, you can start using it, which has really democratized access to digital payments to a large extent. So even if there is no prerequisite saying that you need to know this or you need to have this for you to start receiving digital payments. Even if you don't have an e-commerce website, you can still start receiving. You can still start setting up an online store and start receiving payments using a payments page kind of a product. If you're in a hurry to start receiving payments, you don't have the time to set up a digital presence. You can still use a payment link to start receiving payments really quickly. A lot of SMEs we've noticed have actually skipped multiple steps. Earlier, SMEs used to go through this logical series of steps in their lifetime, wherein they used to set up a digital brand presence, set up a website, set up a Facebook page, set up an Instagram page, for example. And then they used to look at digital payments. Now they've skipped some steps. They're looking to receive digital payments first. They're in a hurry, which is interesting. The other trend which we've noticed in the post-COVID new normal is that we've seen a huge, for obvious reasons, we've seen a huge acceleration in customer acquisition momentum, because a lot of SMEs are gravitating towards digital payments. And we're also seeing a lot of SMEs from tier 2, tier 3 and below. So it's not just about the metro cities in India, not just the Bangalores and the Delhis, the Hyderabad's, Mumbai's, Chennai's of the world. We're seeing a lot of adoption from tier 2, tier 3 and below. And we are also seeing greater monies being processed through the Razorpay ecosystem. So this proves that a lot of SMEs coming on board are not flaky fly-by-night operators, but these are businesses with strong business fundamentals in place, which again is very interesting, with strong product market fit. For their for their products, which is in place, which is interesting. And we've seen, obviously, the other upsurge that we've seen has been in edtech and in health tech specifically because of COVID, and in gaming. We've seen a huge upsurge of startups and SMEs who have actually grown across these three categories, apart from, of course, the staple diet of e-commerce.
Right. Really sorry for the interruption. I'm just going to take a minute of your time to talk to you about something amazing. Move fast, break things. All of that is great advice for when you have nothing to lose. But once you have some base of users and customers, you cannot really afford to risk quality. So how do you still ship at lightning pace and delight your users and customers at the same time? Now that's where Bagasura comes in. Bagasura is a super easy way for people to give and take feedback about the product, and most importantly, close the loop. If you work in a design team, you know screenshots suck. But with Bagasura, you can actually get people to give you very contextual and accurate feedback about your UI and your UX. If you work in a QA team, you know 90% of your time goes in reproducing bugs. But with Bagasura, you can get people to reproduce bugs, document test cases, and resolve things all within Jira itself. Bagasura is being used by some of the leading design and QA teams around. And it's brought to you by the good folks at Mulya Testing, which is one of the best software and QA firms in the world. Do check out bagasura.io, that's BUGASURA.io, and sign up for a demo today. Ship fast and ship well. Right. So, payments as such, right? It's again, I mean, it's a sort of a commoditized business, I would say. And we discussed this when we met as well, that, pivoting from pure play payments into value added services, like the kinds you mentioned, how has that transition been like, will SMEs come to you for more and more banking related or service related, products as such?
That's an interesting question, Roshan. So till a year and a half back, Razorpay was a one-trick pony, so to speak. It sold essentially just payments products, wherein we allowed businesses to be able to receive payments via payment gateway, payment link, payment pages, etc. A year and a half, couple of years back, we also launched a slew of business banking solutions under the Razorpay X umbrella, which allowed businesses to be able to pay out funds to their vendor partners for their employee salaries, to their raw material suppliers, etc. We acquired a company by the name Opfin, which takes care of payroll, which is being subsumed as part of the Razorpay X umbrella, which provides the Razorpay X payroll solutions. So you can pay your employee salaries as well now using Razorpay. Plus, we also have a business banking relationship with the top private bank in the country, through whom we provide current account services. We offer commercial cards. We offer working capital lines of credit to businesses. So one of the things that always holds true about Razorpay, for example, I'm asked this question when I'm talking to a merchant, saying that they ask me this point blank, what makes you unique? Why should I choose Razorpay? And one of the statements that I always say in such cases is that we are a one-stop shop. So we are an end-to-end money movement player, which takes care of your entire life cycle of money movement needs, from receiving payments from your customers to disbursing payouts to your vendor partners, employee salaries, to getting access to lines of working capital credit. You don't have to go to one guy for a payment gateway, to a HDFC or a business bank for your current account and your business banking solutions. You don't have to go to an NBFC for your working capital line of credit. You don't have to go to a Great HR possibly for your payroll. All of this in a single place. You just come to Razorpay. That works. So that helps in establishing a lot of credibility for the brand. And one of the metrics that we internally measure as an organization is products per customer. How many products have we actually managed to sell to a single unique merchant. And that's
Mm.
something which we consciously measure as an organization and take very seriously.
Right.
As I said, our vision is to position and anchor the brand around the theme of being an end-to-end money movement player.
Right.
And that's where the concept of PPC, as we call it, products per customer, becomes very relevant.
Right. Another point that you just touched upon is the differentiator, right? And especially, I feel like in software or in any market that's going to get commoditized as such, I mean, branding plays a huge amount of. I mean, it's hugely important as well, right? So, how do you invest in branding? How do you make the case for branding as such?
That's an interesting one, and because most people are just running after short-term growth, so you also need a focus on the long-term view, so to speak. So you need guys who are in the marketing team itself, for example, who are not just focused on pushing the envelope on customer acquisition momentum and is just looking after numbers. You also need somebody who's looking to see if the brand is actually moving in the right direction across the entire brand evolutionary curve. Is it moving from awareness to recall to top of mind? Even if it is being recalled, what is a brand salience? Is it being recalled for the right reasons? So you need to make sure that these are also factors that are being taken into consideration. So this can be again objectively measured in multiple ways. For example, you can look at various kinds of lead indicators which point towards brand health, which could be direct traffic to your website, the number of repeat visitors, the number of repeat customers that you have. And then you obviously have, and then keyword search volumes, keyword search volume trends, brand keyword search volume trends, Google trends, keyword search volume trends pulled from AdWords or from Google Trends. You could look at a combination of both, which can give you an absolute and a directional sense of how good or otherwise the brand is vis-a-vis competition. Plus, of course, you can have brand salience surveys, etc., which are conducted to know if the brand health is in the right direction, is moving in the right direction.
Right, right. So you also operate at the vanguard of, how should I put it? I mean, so fintech is a very complicated ecosystem, right? So there's the incumbent banks or insurance folks, right? And then you have the merchants that you're dealing with, and then you have the policymakers and the government or quasi-government agencies and so on, right? So you have multiple complicated stakeholders in that whole ecosystem, and you have to mean one thing to someone else, and one thing to someone else, right? So how are you cognizant of that? I mean, or do you really are mindful of that at all? I mean, when you operate as a business head.
So that's something that we need to take into account. So, for example, we do have separate teams that are focused on maintaining our relationships with our banking partners. So they are like very important stakeholders for us in this entire mix. We do have a separate team which is focused on working with the regulatory authorities, because that again is an extremely, given that we operate in the fintech space, where there is often to a certain extent a little bit of ambiguity around rules, or to a certain extent in some cases some shifting goalposts. We need to make sure that we stay on top of the legal and the compliance requirements that are applicable in the country. So we do have a separate team which is focused on the legal and compliance side of things. We do have a separate team which is focused on maintaining a relationship with banks, with the various schemes, networks, all of these. So all of these are very important stakeholders for us in this entire ecosystem. We take our relationships with a lot of these people very, very seriously, because we need them. We need their support in order to be successful in our mission of being an end-to-end money movement player.
Right, right. So another passion of yours is being a teacher, being a coach, and a mentor, right? So what has that experience been like? I mean, what do you value in that?
So it's a great foil to to the work that we do on the corporate side of things, because it certainly helps you widen your gaze, and it also is a great hack for building self confidence. In my view, I think teaching is a great way for you to improve your own skills, because if you're going to be up in front of a classroom full of students, and if you need to talk about a topic, you need to actually have done that research before. And one of the things that a lot of these schools in this day and age really value is they value industry expertise, and not just theoretical knowledge. So if you can make sure that you can bring that additional ingredient to the table as part of the entire teaching recipe, so to speak, then that's something that a lot of B schools really value. And it really does help. It helps in multiple ways. It helps in deepening your own understanding of that topic. That is one thing. It helps you improve your own self-confidence. It helps you improve your own selling skills, public speaking skills. It helps in multiple different ways. And it also helps you in building better networks. And apart from all of this, I do enjoy teaching and speaking in general, which is why it really works out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic learning experience actually. Really,
Absolutely.
being able to present, in front of people. Uh, so finally, I'll have to come back to the sales and marketing folks who are operating, at a fairly difficult time.
Yeah.
Any advice for these guys? I mean, at this point of time.
I mean, yeah, it is a tough time, but I do believe that there is an opportunity, and there is that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for, for all of the resilient sales and marketing guys out there. I think for marketing guys out there, I think we need to look for ways to drive customer acquisition momentum and to drive customer engagement beyond just paid marketing efforts. I think marketing dollars are going to be hard to come by, and that's going to be a reality that's not going away anytime soon. That reality is not going away anytime soon. So marketers need to look for innovative ways for driving customer acquisition. I think both elements like organic marketing, SEO, search engine optimization, lead engagement and nurturing. Right, a wise guy once said, "Engagement is the next growth." So elements, some of the more unglamorous, unsexy elements of marketing like lead engagement and nurturing, SEO, etc. I think those will come back into focus, and marketers need to spend a lot more time focusing on elements like those.
Yeah.
One of the more unsung heroes of marketing is also earned media creation. There is not enough focus that goes into creating earned media. Earned media is media exposure or eyeballs that you get for your brand, which you've earned for through the strength of your content itself. So one of the great ways for you to drive earned media is through social media shares, right? So let's say I make a simple post. I don't spend any money on it. 100 of my followers end up seeing it. That's my owned media because they're my own followers. Paid media is I spend some money. I spend $5,000. Let's say 5,000 people end up seeing it. That's paid media. Earned media is I make a post whose content is so interesting, so awesome that out of my 100 followers, 50 of them end up sharing it. Let's say each
Right.
of those 50 have 100 followers each. That gives me 5,000 incremental eyeball exposures, right? Which is not my own. It's not own media. I've not spent any money on it, so it's not paid. It's stuff that I have earned. So I think the focus should come back to earned media as well, and on PR. PR is another great way. Organic PR is another great way for brands to create earned media apart from social media shares.
Yeah.
From a sales perspective, it is tough, but I think it is getting easier. It was tougher a few months back. I think a lot of businesses were adjusting to the post-COVID new normal. Virtual selling was difficult, but now it's getting easier. And I see a lot of businesses which have understood that this is here to stay. Both clients and and sales guys, they've understood that this new normal is here to stay, and they've adjusted to the virtual environment of selling, and they're doing it fairly well.
Yeah.
And the idea is, from a sales perspective, I think one of the things that we need to do really well as salespeople is to make sure that we cut to the chase and we exhibit customer value upfront in our sales pitch, and we show what's in it for the customer upfront in the sales pitch. Customers are, a lot less patient now in the post-COVID new normal, and rightly so. So I think that's also forced a lot of sales folks to sharpen their sales pitches that much more.
Right. I want to pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned. I think one is that, in the good times when you can just have infinite potential for top of the funnel, I mean, nobody really gives a damn about all of these engagement and all of those things, right? Organic engagement sounds like old fashioned stuff, but at this point of time, they're absolute gold. When you don't have those dollars, and, when you have to build those skills in-house, right? So, yeah, I mean, that is something that I've noticed as well, right? Okay. So in terms of shifting focus, right? I mean, for this new normal as such, what are some of the things that will not change, from here on in? Assume that, tomorrow we're going to go back to normal or whatever that looks like. What are some things that have indelibly changed from a marketing perspective?
I think the growth at all costs mindset, I think that is gone forever in my view. I think across industries, I think there was this time when certain brands, VC funded companies, etc. They had this growth at all costs kind of a mindset, saying that I don't care about the cost involved. I just want growth. I just want hockey stick growth, for example. I think that mindset is gone forever. I do believe so.
Right. Yeah. I agree with you. And on that note, thank you so much, Veda. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
It was fascinating as always talking to you. So look forward to speaking with you soon.
Likewise, man. Thank you so much, Roshan, for the opportunity. Wish you all the very best. Take care. Stay safe.